Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to another episode of What You Believe. I'm Devin Croner, your host, and I am so glad to have you with me as we continue this journey talking with people, different backgrounds, different experiences, different perspectives, different beliefs, all of it, because all of it, even if we don't agree with it, even if we don't understand it, can add value to our lives by bringing a level of insight, a level of connection, a level of knowledge and understanding that we didn't otherwise have before. That is what this program, that is what these interviews are all about. That's why I look to interview people with different religious experiences, different political experiences, different life experiences, things that I don't necessarily believe or things that I don't necessarily know anything about, because I think that there is so much value in bringing understanding, in having discussion, in talking instead of shouting, in listening sometimes instead of speaking. And that is an art that is lost more and more in our world today. I'm so glad that you decided to join us on this journey as we continue to talk with people from all over the country, maybe one day all over the world. And I'm going to take the time here as we are waiting for our guest to arrive today to invite you to participate. Of course, we have a Facebook group, the What You Believe Facebook group. That is where you can go for insights, when we have links to post, when we are letting you know about interviews that are coming. We'll post the links for the interviews when they come up. But it's also a place to connect with me if you have ideas, if you have people that you think I should connect to, if you want to send a message with some feedback, if you want to share one of these links with your friends for an interview that maybe was informative or insightful or helpful to you or challenging to you, or man, I totally didn't agree with that Devin Croner guy in talking about that subject. Listen to this nonsense. Whatever it is, I think there's value in all of that. And so I invite you to like the Facebook page. Just type in the search What You Believe, and it'll come up. Or you can go to my personal Facebook page if you happen to be a friend of mine and find it that way. Also, you can email me directly at cronerministries@gmail.com. That's Croner, Kroner, just like it says right up here, right there, cronerministries@gmail.com. And I would be happy to respond, to engage in discussion. I really do try not to debate with people. Now, if you get on my personal Facebook page, every now and then I'm going to debate with somebody. But in this format, in this context, I'm not looking to try and convince. I'm not looking to try and argue. I'm looking to discuss. And so I invite you to connect with me however you feel is best. And again, thank you for watching. I'm going to bring in our guest right now, and we're going to be talking about Southern hospitality and culture. And I'm excited about this interview because I don't fully have an idea of exactly how this is going to go, but I think it's a very fascinating topic. And so, Elijah, can you hear me okay, first of all?
There we go. I unmuted my mic, and now I can hear you just fine.
Perfect. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me tonight and have this discussion. Appreciate it. To start off with, will you tell us who you are and just tell us a little bit about you to get started?
My name is Elijah Ravenscroft. I am an independent minister for like the past 15 years, and terribly Southern. I tried for a long time as an actor to get rid of my accent, so we won't be hearing that, but it's still a part of who I am.
Hey, my wife is from Tennessee, Manchester, Tennessee, and we've lived kind of all over the place, and so most of the time her accent doesn't come out, but certain words, or if she gets mad at me, it kind of comes out a little bit. So I totally understand that. Tell us a little bit again, just about some of the things that you're involved in, because you have actually a wide range of interests and projects, things like that.
Yeah. I give me just 1 second, please. I'm sorry. There we go. I do a little bit of everything. I was an actor. I'm a crafter. I spent a lot of time studying other cultures, and that helped me understand my own. Same with languages and religions. And so I have gone out of my way to kind of educate myself about the world around me. And that has manifested in some really unique, um, niche interests, such as uh, the intersection between spirituality and cultural ties, and things like that. So,
Very cool. Very cool. So our topic tonight is kind of Southern hospitality mixed in with a little bit of where we are culturally right now or societally right now in America in terms of discussing race relations, racism, all those sorts of things. It's kind of hard for me in one sentence to describe exactly where we're going to go with this, and maybe I don't fully know exactly where we're going to go with this, but I just found it a very interesting idea to discuss with you. So to kick us off with, I guess let's talk about the idea of Southern hospitality. What is, other than the yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir, that sort of thing, what is Southern hospitality traditionally and in terms of today?
to me, Southern hospitality has always been a an obligation to other people. It's been an obligation to help other people when they need it. It's been an obligation to share your table with people who are your guests. It's been an obligation to include people whether or not you wanted to. And it's not so much a kindness that is paid, but a social responsibility in the South, in my opinion.
Okay. So it sounds, the way you describe it, almost like just, what we would idealize as being a good human,
Mhm.
a little bit. But in terms of where we're at in our world today, and of course, in light of the coronavirus pandemic, in light of the race relations and the George Floyd situation, as we're recording this, there's a lot of discussion about systemic racism. There's a lot of discussion about monuments and bases and the flag, the Southern flag, the rebel flag, as some people call it, being outlawed, things like that. And it's really kind of put a focus on the South. And so kind of talk about that a little bit from your perspective, your viewpoint. What have you seen? And how does that mesh with what you understand as a Southerner and in terms of your viewpoint on Southern hospitality?
So interestingly, the South has always been kind of two-faced about certain things. And I say that with love as a Southerner. Because on the one hand, they're Southerners are typically very honest. And when they have to be dishonest, they do it in the politest way possible most of the time. Um, but it's this odd dichotomy where we have the responsibility of Southern hospitality to extend unto other people the goodnesses that we have, the blessings that we have achieved.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, rampant racism, homophobia, transphobia, all of these xenophobic concepts that bubble up in the South so often. And it's very peculiar to me because those two things do not go together.
I love how you are distinguishing, because a lot of people don't. They kind of, it's all or nothing in a lot of these discussions. You're distinguishing, here's the concept, here's what we're going for, here's the reality of it. And I love the fact that you say they don't really go together. And yet that's kind of the mix that we've had for many, many years. I mean, hundreds of years, really, in this country. Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of it is that there is a misinformation about the history of the South.
Okay.
There are a lot of people who don't believe the reasons that the South went to war with the North. There are a lot of people that don't believe that racism had anything to do with the Civil War. There are a lot of people that don't believe that it had anything to do with voting laws or the Electoral College or the formation of the KKK or the mysterious sprinkling of these exact carbon copy statues all across the South to celebrate Confederate generals well after the war ended. And it's I don't believe that Southern people are intentionally, in most cases at least, being xenophobic. I think that they have been taught that their world is against them through a combination of factors. One of those factors being progressive politics moving forward toward the equality of all people, which, as we all know, if you're used to being in a position where you have more than somebody else, then it's very common for you to sense a move toward equality as an attack. And on top of that, there's the persecution complex that Southern Christendom has that believes that in order to be the church that they should be, they have to be persecuted when they're really the most privileged religion in this region.
That is very insightful and very thought-provoking as well, because again, a lot of times you hear people talking about the whole idea of systemic racism and people saying all sorts of things that really kind of skirt around the issue, right? They say, well, I'm not racist. They say I'm colorblind. They say I've never done anything racist. Don't blame me for something that happened hundreds of years ago. Kind of all of those things that don't address the fact that there are problems. And what I'm hearing you saying is right up front that there are problems.
Oh, there are a lot of problems. There are still places not far from where I am where, oh, look out, buddy, where you don't necessarily want to have your car break down if you don't represent the platonic ideal of the common Southerner. And these issues are something that we need to address as Southerners, or they're not going to get any better. Just sweeping this under the rug and saying, well, it's heritage and not hate. Well, maybe we should dig a little deeper into that heritage and why you're being taught the things that you're being taught.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the things that you were taught that maybe some people would say are heritage, and some people might say, no, that's hate. And how do you differentiate between the two?
Well, I grew up in a family that there are different kinds of racism. There's blatant racism and then there's casual racism. And a lot of people who are casually racist don't realize they're casually racist. And in my family and in my area and in my the institutions in which I was brought up, schools and churches, there was a lot of casual racism that didn't recognize itself as being racist. And that's the first problem. The second problem is that we run into things like the Confederate Battle Standard, which is, I think, a naval jack. It wasn't actually used in the war that much. But you run into that being a symbol of heritage rather than symbolizing the Confederate desire, I guess is the better word for it, to keep slave labor alive. Because what we're taught is that, well, it was really about states' rights. And because it was about states' rights, it was about the federal government telling us what we can and can't do. Mm-hmm. And because of that, this flag actually symbolizes our resistance to big government and oversight and trampling on our freedoms, when in actuality, the flag represents trampling on the freedoms of others.
That is not a statement that you hear from a lot of people, white people, Southern white people. Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of people run into this problem where they're confronted with evidence that goes against what they've been taught as identity.
Mm.
When you're a Southerner, you are taught that you are a Southerner. I am Kentuckian. I will always be Kentuckian no matter where I go. I will be Kentuckian. And Kentucky, while it was neutral in the Civil War for the most part, my region actually was a Confederate sympathizing region. Kentucky is what we consider the farthest north you can go and still be Southern. So no matter where I go, that's going to go with me. It's part of my identity. And a lot of these people that are having these problems confronting this information, you can provide them with facts. You can provide them with everything, but they perceive it as attack on identity. And when you perceive an attack on your identity, you close off to facts.
Mm-hmm.
You're less likely to listen to reason because you feel attacked.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how do we combat that then? Because again, if you start talking to me and I start feeling attacked about, you're saying that who I am is bad, who I am is evil. This is just who I am. You hear those statements from folks right now. So how do we spin the conversation, turn the conversation in a way that is not as confrontational, not as, us versus them, so that there can be some level of productivity coming from it?
I feel like in order to talk specifically with Southerners about Southern problems, you need to use a Southern context. One of the things that I have been fond of the last 5-6 years is the phrase, y'all means all. Because it does. It's a contraction for you all. It is one of the only second person plural words we have in modern English. And it almost exclusively stems from Southern people and the Black community. There's a lot of overlap in language between Southern American English and AAVE for very unfortunate reasons that I'm sure you can all guess. But when we come into a conversation where we talk about things, we have to talk about them based on similarity. I am a white person. I am responsible for my own actions. I don't necessarily have to pay for the actions of my ancestors, but I do reap the benefits of the racism that was established by them. And I need to confront that. I'm not personally necessarily the problem as long as I'm examining myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to bring that to other people as well. If, say, we were having a discussion, you're not necessarily the problem. It's some of the things that you've learned and been taught. And so when we realize that, white people are inherently racist, not because white people are inherently racist, but because the systems perpetuate white supremacy, then we need to talk about that. And we have to understand why those systems are the way that they are. And we have to understand ultimately that Southern culture does not exclude on its own anybody. Southern culture includes everybody if you let it.
So a couple of things in that that I want to maybe unpack a little bit more. Getting back to the Southern culture idea, but first take a step back. How do you, I guess, in trying to think of how to word this. So in looking at somebody and saying, okay, you're not the problem, but the privilege that you have because of these things in the past, that's very easy for some people to see. And it's very easy. The more that I engage with people in the Black community, the more it helps me see that as well, because you get that different perspective. But for a lot of people, that's not easy to see, because they think, I didn't grow up rich. I had to work I was working as a kid. I had to put myself through college. I had to do, and so they go into all of that, right? And more than one thing can be true at the same time. Like, you can have worked hard for what you have, but also have had opportunities available to you because of the color of your skin that other people just wouldn't have had, correct?
Yes, exactly. I grew up tremendously poor. I still am. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, you're fine. You're fine, please.
I grew up tremendously poor and still am. And the idea of white privilege at first to me seemed silly because nobody handed me money just because I was white. But the more I examined it, the more I realized that when you have to break it down, history is cause and effect. And when you don't teach history as cause and effect, you'll lose a lot of things. 400 years ago, the first slave ships came over. And we started enslaving people that looked different than us. And this is a problem. Once we decided to stop doing that, the system, the social thought process that kept people that looked different from us down, the black community, the freed slaves, that kept them down, was established because we spent so long treating them not as people. And that mindset continued even past emancipation. Mm-hmm. And so people, white people, racist white people, because racism was the standard because of this system, would start to section off areas for them in towns that maybe nobody else wanted. And maybe they didn't give those areas the best cut of tax money. Maybe those areas were left to fend for themselves. And so you have a lot of people who came from nothing, literally, who are still impoverished. And then as society continues to advance and they try to gain equality, people still have this backwards mindset that somehow they're different and therefore unworthy of this equality, and keep trying to put them down. And this stacks layers on layers. It's like every time you do an injustice to the black community, it adds a weight to their shoulders. And at this point in our history, they're carrying so much that there's no way they can run the same way that a white person could, even with no opportunities. Even a white person that grew up in the middle of nowhere with no money, had no scholarships, no chance for college, still has a social advantage just because they're white. Mm-hmm. And getting people to understand that is difficult.
And what you just explained really is how we got to the point where we're having the conversation about police brutality, mm-hmm. right? I mean, because again, I believe, I know a lot of police officers. I have family members who are police. I don't believe that the police necessarily want to go after black people for the most part. I'm sure that there are those. But what you just described is you have these the slaves that have been freed, and they're given these opportunities, separate but equal, all this stuff, but they're not given the same resources. Mm-hmm. And so they develop a whole new set of problems. Mm-hmm. That then when that bleeds over into the areas where all the white people were, then they're going to respond. There's going to be laws. There's going to be ordinances. There's going to be restrictions, all those sorts of things. And as you said, it layers. And when you talk about dozens and hundreds of years, now you get to the place where racial profiling is a standard in a lot of places, where I can be in downtown Chicago and be dressed in a sweatshirt and sweatpants and walk in and out of places and nobody's going to think anything of it. Mm-hmm. But a black person does that same thing dressed that way and somebody's going to be calling the cops on it. I mean, right? That's what you've just described.
And the systems themselves have done so much to reinforce this inequality too, actively. We talked earlier about how there's blatant active racism and casual racism. Well, I mean, a lot of times there are smear campaigns against certain cultures. There are, we all remember when marijuana was prohibited. That a lot of the reason that it was prohibited is because of the social perception of who was smoking it. Mm. And that was definitely along racial and color lines. And to this point, like now, white people are raking in money hand over fist on legalized marijuana, and there are black people that are stuck in the prison industrial complex for mere possession of it, and that's policed completely differently among the races. You have things like the and I don't want to sound too tinfoil hatty, but this stuff has been released to the public. I mean, you've got stuff like the government releasing certain drugs into certain areas to give an excuse to heavily police these communities. You've got people turning a blind eye to other communities to reduce their populations. To skip topics from race for a moment, the way that we handled the AIDS epidemic in the 80s was, there's no other word but cruel for that. And it was intentional. I mean, things like that help set up this system where no matter what anybody else does, if you're not a white Christian male who's cisgender and heterosexual, you're going to have a rough time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's almost a matter of, okay, this isn't what we're going to consider normal, so we're going to find a way to minimize and ostracize, and if possible, eliminate.
Mm-hmm. And it all comes down to fear of the other. That's why I try to use xenophobia as a blanket term when I can. It's what drove Lovecraft's horror, is that he was terribly racist. That's where all the fear of the unknown with the dark beings from the outer cosmos comes in, because he was just terribly, terribly racist. And you get these kinds of horror stories lodged in people's heads where they're different. And if we allow them to be seen as equal to us, then we're going to be wiped out. And that's what's driving the white supremacy movement right now. Is this fear that someday white people will become the minority. And I'm like, why are minorities treated badly or something? Is it bad to be a minority in America? I mean,
spin is not necessarily the right word for what you just did there, but I think that's a very interesting spin on it, because if you think about it that way, that should cause a lot of people to stop and think about how they are responding and treating people. Because if I'm being driven by fear that we're going to be replaced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I'm afraid of that is because people who are in the minority are not treated equally. That kind of takes away the whole point of why I'm like, okay, if I was doing the right thing, if I was treating, all men are created equal, okay, why not Black people? Why not Latino people? Why not Asian people? It really kind of diffuses a lot of the argument, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And you get to a point where you look at, like, men fought against feminism because they were afraid that women would have power over them. And you have this thing where, because of the standpoint, the place of social superiority that a subset of the community has, they start to see anything close to equality as knocking them off their pedestal. They won't get their special treatment anymore. Mm-hmm. And because of that, we have an issue with all these people trying to take our stuff or work hard for this money that we've earned, and we're not turning our noses in the right places for that.
What role does politics play in this and precipitating it or alleviating it? And then religion as well, because I think that definitely, I'm a pastor. I know you said you were a minister. I find a lot of value in having a set of beliefs, but I also look back in history and see how the beliefs that I have been twisted and misused by large segments of people to kill, to steal and plunder and take land and all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. So how do those areas kind of fit into this?
Politics, specifically focusing the lens on the South, politics is complicated because Southern Democrats are more right-wing than a lot of other Democrats are, which is impressive because Democrats are at best centrists. And a lot of traction for the Republican Party exists in the South for reasons that have never been clear to me. And I think it's summed up best in a quote that I read one time, that we're not poor, we're just temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Um, because by and large, the GOP ticket seems to, fend for the corporations, for the wealthy, for the small minority of people that control a lot of the wealth, and people, poor people who tend to vote Republican tend to do so against their own interests because they really believe that one day they'll be rich like that. And I feel that that's one of the things that politics does. I've seen it a lot in my own personal life. I had a cousin um, who was homosexual and campaigned against gay marriage forever because he didn't think it was right. And it just blew my mind. I'm like, how can you advocate against yourself that way? I don't understand. And as for religion, there are so many things about religion that have been twisted and used. There are subsets of Christianity that believe that um, black people are evil or inferior, that it's the mark of Cain, or that they have been twisted or cursed somehow. The word homosexual doesn't exist in the Bible and didn't until 1946, and almost all of Southern Christianity is anti-gay because they have been told to be. And it's things like that. Jesus was not white. Jesus never advocated for rich people. He said that it would be really difficult for them to enter the kingdom of heaven. He advocated for poor people. He advocated for the sick. He handed out free health care. He gave away bread. He did all these things that the modern Southern Christian ideology does not agree with. And I think a lot of that comes from, to rabbit trail just a little bit, abortion was not a hot button issue with the church until they could no longer legally discriminate against black people. They needed some way to rally their votes. And that's when abortion became an issue among the Southern Baptists, because before that they didn't care. And so that became an issue. And because of that and some of Reagan's policies in the early 80s, you see this melding of Southern Christianity specifically, but more generally, American evangelical Christianity with Republican or otherwise socially conservative ideals. And that marriage has given birth to a Republican Jesus who is nothing like the version that we find in the book.
It's been an alarming thing. Again, I was a kid in the 90s, 80s and 90s, but mostly 90s. And it's been an alarming thing to me to watch the transformation of the Republican Party into this party of God. I can't find anywhere in the Bible that I'm preaching out of, at least, and I have several versions where Jesus was overly Republican or specifically overly Democrat. What he was very overly human.
Mm-hmm.
Let's help people. Let's minister to people. Let's go to where people are and meet needs for people. And again, now to transition kind of back towards the Southern hospitality side of it, the core of the concept of Southern hospitality is very much in line with that kind of belief of people oriented. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is. You feed people because they come to visit, and you don't want them to go hungry. You help people on the side of the road because somebody else may not come along. I mean, that's the Good Samaritan story right there. Mm-hmm. You see somebody in a shopping center and you don't know where something is, you can ask them and they'll tell you. I mean, people around here will help you almost for anything, and that's the core of Southern hospitality. And if we extended that to its logical conclusion, we would be so inclusive of everybody that we would just want everybody to have the best of everything. And it's these social and political lines that have been drawn and lies that have been drilled into people's heads, and otherwise just this indoctrination about what the South really stands for That is the roadblock to that.
Mhm. And it almost seems like basically the way that you are explaining it and laying it out there, that has been done on purpose to keep certain segments of people in positions of power, and then to keep certain segments of people, specifically minorities, from having access to the same thing. So we can pass things like civil rights legislation, we can pass things like voting laws giving women and minorities the right to vote, and say, look at what we're doing, but it's almost like a magic trick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Watch this, but really what's happening is over here.
Mm-hmm. And you see the beginnings of it during segregation. You've got these whites only water fountains, for example, and not 6, 10, 12 feet away, there would be one for black people. Oh, look, we've given them a water fountain. We won't share what we have, but here's one for them. It's separate, it's equal, it's different. And that's the kind of stuff. It goes back farther than that, but that's one of the best examples I can think of right off the top of my head. And that kind of switch, that kind of that bait and switch is one of the things that we're going to have to overcome as a region if we want to be taken seriously in the actual modern world.
Mm-hmm. So how do we begin to do that then, I guess? How do we begin to uncouple the idea of the Southern hospitality and this culture that is very pro helping people and pro being there for people from what it has kind of fused into with systemic racism, essentially?
I think we can take a cue from the way that Southerners treat mentally ill family members, historically speaking. A lot of other places you'll see in novels or in stories or tales where people who are mentally ill in the family are hidden away, put in an attic, they're locked in the basement, they're sent away somewhere to live with another family member. In the South, we just put them on the front porch and hand them some sweet tea and a pipe and let them be who they are. And when people walk by, we explain, oh, that's just Uncle Jim. He's just like that. Mm-hmm. And I feel like if we took cues from that, I mean, that said, the South has mental health access issues, something I'm struggling with right now. But if we took our cues from that and just said, well, that's Bob and there's Ann and they're a little different, but that's okay because that's how God made them, or that's how we believe they grew up, or that's how they were born, or whatever the case may be, depending on what you believe. I think if we turn toward that, I think we'll make progress. One of the things that got me, I was raised very racist. I was raised very homophobic. I was raised very transphobic. And it wasn't intentional to other people. Like, other people didn't seek to push me in that direction, but the institutions had those. And the way that I got out of it was using one of Mark Twain's ideas, just to meet other people. When you meet people outside yourself, outside your small little echo chamber, you'll learn that there's not really anything wrong with being different unless you make it that way. As long as you're not hurting anybody, then go about your business. And the internet is really good for that. If we can step out of our echo chambers, if we can turn off our Fox News or our CNN and get in there and talk to people who have different ideas than us, we can learn about people in ways that we never could before. We need to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. And that is so much what this whole program is designed to be about. I mean, I talk to people about passions and hobbies a lot as well, but the idea of talking to people that, maybe are of different religions or different political backgrounds or things like that, because, I can say, okay, here's what I believe, and I don't think that's right. But a lot of times what I find is I don't think that's right, but I don't really know why I don't think that's right, because I don't understand it.
That's one of the things. My ministry is an interfaith ministry. I am a very unusual person in my little section of Kentucky because I was raised Christian and conservative, and now I'm a wildly leftist queer wizard. And to see the breakdown of my own prejudices and to want that for other people, my life has gotten so much better. I'm here to tell you about it. My life has gotten so much better since I stopped being afraid of people different than me.
Mm.
And to see that working on a larger scale is something that I would like to foster. We need to examine where our beliefs come from. You know, I know what I believe spiritually. I know what I believe politically. I know that a lot of the things overlap there. And it's changed over the years because I grew up thinking, you know, well, these people are wrong. Well, why did I think that? Because my parents told me, because my family told me, because my school and my church told me that. What was the reason for that?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back a step further and find out. And when you self-examine that way, you start to look inward and break down these things. You take your ideas a piece at a time and you just tear them apart and throw away the parts that don't work anymore.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is a very important thing for people to do. Like in terms of religion, for instance, you know, I find that to be one of the things that fortifies my faith more than anything is when I take things that, okay, I believe this. I believe this about God. I believe this about, you know, how I'm supposed to live. But why? And how does that mesh with these other things that I believe? Because again, you know, growing up in the 90s, Christian, white, rural America, you know, I was never, I don't ever remember being told that to be homophobic, for instance. Uh, and I don't ever specifically remember acting homophobic or trying to treat anybody different, but I did always have that mentality, well, those people are different and I don't know, I don't know if it's going to rub off on me. I don't know if it's, you know, any of that. And as I began to examine, because you know most churches have the stance of homosexuality is wrong, it's a sin, and I understand that argument. I can make that argument, but I also look at the way Jesus treated people over and over and over and over again, and I'm coming to this place as a pastor, even where I'm like, I need these things to mesh.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I believe in right and wrong. Yes, I believe in if you want to simplify it so much to say good and bad, but I also believe that he told me treat people the way you want to be treated,
Mm-hmm.
and that was everybody. And you know, in the Greek, whenever Jesus says all, that word for all means all. Like he doesn't leave anybody out.
Yeah.
And I found that those things don't always mesh with organized religion today.
We run into places where we look at the Old Testament and we say, well, for example, homosexuality is bad because Leviticus says so. Well, Leviticus also says that you're not supposed to trim the corners of your beard. You're not supposed to collect interest on loans. And we've thrown a lot of that away. We look at the New Testament and we see things that Jesus has done. We talk about the way that he treats other people. The two commandments are love God and love other people. And then he goes even farther with the Great Commission and says things like heal the sick. So I'm okay. I'm not a doctor. How do we do this? Oh, well, now I believe in universal health care. So, you know, it's things like that you go back and you examine, you think, why is this different? Why is this weird? Why is none of this making sense? And you just have to find out what you believe and why you believe it. For me, the thing that really got me to where I am now is realizing that if we're all created in God's image and we are so different, that tells a lot about God. That says a lot about the multitude of expressions of love and caring that any creator deity has, because we're made in God's image, but we look different. So it can't be physically, you know. I mean, it might be physically. I don't know. He may look just like me. I hope not. I don't think, you know, wouldn't want a painting of me anywhere. But you get that feeling that he meant inside. And if we're all the same on the inside, then everything else is just window dressing.
Mm. That is something that I think is just so overlooked again, though, because we get so focused, we get so siloed in our groups, in our, whether it's religion or politics or ethnic or north or south or
Mhm.
whatever it is. We get so siloed in our groups, and we stop looking for the commonalities, right? We stop looking for the ways where we can connect. We look for the ways that we're divided, and we focus on those. And that's happening so much in the world today, is all the reasons why we're against this and we're against that. And and again, I've come to the place as a minister where I'm like, I don't see that in the Bible where Jesus was really out there about all the things he was against. There are things that he was against.
Mhm.
Hypocrisy, he was against hypocrisy.
Mhm.
Lying, he was against lying, but not people. He was against things,
Mhm.
not people. And that's really, really telling. And what you're describing, again, in terms of Southern culture and Southern hospitality, is being not against people.
Mhm.
But that's not always the way that it's played out. And so, you can see things like, for instance, where somebody could, you use the example earlier about a car broken down on the side of the road. Somebody could stop and help because that's the right thing to do. And in doing that, make a comment that is, very racist, because it's, a black person or a white person or whatever, whatever it might be. Or even what's more socially acceptable today, the way we as men a lot of times talk about women,
Mhm.
right? We still do that all the time, and that's starting to change, but it still is there. And bringing it to light is a very, very important thing, because if we don't see it, if we don't think about it, we're never going to address it.
Yeah. And social change is like a battleship. It's not a John boat. It takes a while to turn. So that'll we'll be seeing effects of this ripple effect of people getting more and more open-minded and more equal, and watching what they say and watching how they feel, and policing themselves. I don't like using that word, but being more mindful of the things that they say and do. And
Mm-hmm.
we'll see that increase over time. Right now we're just in a tough spot with it because the old ways aren't working for us, and a lot of people refuse to let them go. And if you don't do that, then you're going to go with them, and that's just it's hard because it means giving up on certain things. It means giving up certain traditions. I probably didn't let go of the Confederate flag until I was in my 20s. I still thought it was a symbol of heritage. I thought I was proud to have ancestors that fought in the war for the Confederacy. I thought about joining Sons of Confederate Veterans, and the more I looked at it, the more I thought this doesn't accurately represent who I am anymore. And it takes that you've got to look inside for the hard work.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there is a danger of the pendulum swinging too far, too fast right now with all the things? Again, we're talking about systemic racism. We're still dealing with Me Too, the movement. We're all of these things. We're dealing with the politics and religion aspect, and Supreme Court nominations and how that's going to, and all of these things. And it's like everything becomes so important.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's this danger that what happens is nothing actually changes and becomes important because people just get burnt out?
I feel like that happens sometimes with people that don't guard themselves, that don't take their time to assimilate new information. There's going to be some mental whiplash that you deal with because there's a lot of people of all ages that, the older you get, the more likely you are to be stuck in your ways because you're used to them. They're comfortable. And there's a lot of people that are not going to want to go along with that. There are a lot of people that don't want to change. They don't want to look inside. They don't want to do the hard work. They don't want to, stuff like that. And a lot of people, a lot of what we're seeing right now, I firmly believe that a lot of the white supremacy that we're seeing right now, a lot of the neo-Nazi, KKK kind of stuff that we're seeing right now is the death throes of an ideology. They're loud and they're adamant about it because they realize that ideology is no longer acceptable and it is dying out. And I am hopeful for that.
Like a wounded animal syndrome almost.
Yeah, exactly. They're backed into a corner because the world is smaller than it's ever been. We hold the sum total of human knowledge in our hands at the checkout line,
Mm-hmm.
and it's becoming harder and harder to draw invisible lines between people when we realize we're all just the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's got a lot of people feeling backed in the corner. You see it with the not to politicize a public health issue, but you see it a lot with the mask thing with COVID. A lot of people don't want to mask up because they feel like it somehow infringes upon their rights to pass deadly diseases to other people. I mean, and they're reaching and they're grabbing at straws, trying to remain relevant, trying to hold on to this ideology. And somebody just needs to look at them and say, no one's asking you to give up your freedoms or your rights. We're asking you to extend them to other people.
It's a good way to look at it. Again, the idea of preferring people above yourself, treating other people the way you want to be treated. I feel like I've read that somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's
As a
common
student
sense
of
if you really believe what you say you believe.
as a student of comparative religion, that is the only, like, there are a lot of commonalities between religions. That's the only thing I found in every single one of them. Even like LaVeyan Satanism says that, like, to treat other people in the way that you would have yourself be treated. And it's worded differently, but almost every religion holds to that. Like, you have to treat other people the way you want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
And to see so many people of every faith just ignore that is mind-boggling.
Yeah, it does make me wonder sometimes. So let me ask you this question then. So you mentioned how you grew up in a family that maybe was not racist on purpose, but there was racism there. You kind of challenged that, come out of that in a lot of ways. So I guess a couple of different questions all coming together. Number one, are you of the opinion, do you believe that anybody is capable of changing if they are given the opportunity and the right information?
Yes. I believe that there is no person that cannot change their mind about something if they have the right equipment, if they have the right information, if they have the right opportunity, and they have the time. The thing that will stop people from changing is they have to want to do
it. Preach that, my buddy.
it.
All right. Next question right along with this. So, again, I don't want to politicize things, but you take a somebody like a Joe Biden who people say has issues. You take somebody like a Donald Trump who people say has issues. I don't know who these people are, but whatever side you find yourself on, right? You can always look at the other side and say, here's their issues. Is it okay, do you think, and societally, can we get to a place where we can accept if somebody were to just say, you know what, I used to believe some crazy crap and I don't believe that anymore, and I'm sorry I said that, and I'm sorry I did that, and I don't want to be that person anymore? Do you think that we need that level of like gut check honesty to happen for some people?
I feel like we do. I feel like there's a lot of talk about cancel culture right now.
Mm-hmm.
And really that's just holding people accountable for their actions and their words. And I feel like the only danger with that particular style of movement is if we don't give people the room to change.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, a lot of people have, again, not to, this is something that's hit my family hard because we were big Harry Potter fans. J.K. Rowling has said some things that have hurt some people. And whatever your beliefs on that topic, whatever your beliefs on her, my family has decided that, until she decides she wants to change her viewpoint, listen to different information and help people rather than use her platform to harm them, we're not going to support her anymore. But we're opening that room for her to change. We're opening that area for her to expand her understanding of humankind and how we're all different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we need to expand that space to anybody that can learn, because we've all done some terrible things. You talked about the Me Too movement earlier. There are so many men on this planet that have done things that are wrong. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that at all. But I will say that a lot of times we don't, as men, we're not taught to value the consent of other people.
Right.
And I feel like when you get to a point where you can value the consent of other people, then maybe you need to re-examine your life and your choices and the things that you've done, and make amends and make apologies for the things that you've done that have hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that way in every arena.
Mm-hmm. So important, because again, I find, like I said earlier, multiple things can be true at the same time, right? You can say this was always wrong and people shouldn't have accepted it, but 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, it was accepted. And so most people wouldn't have looked at catcalling a woman as she walked by, or saying there's a commercial right now, you may have seen it. I believe it's Procter and Gamble, but I'm not sure. That I didn't even know what the product was, but the commercial started out with this young African American girl and her mother behind him, and she was saying that somebody had told her she was pretty for a black girl, and the mom basically says, "No, you're just pretty."
Mm-hmm.
Right? And again, that was always a racist way to say that.
Mm-hmm.
But 50 years ago, 100 years ago, the person who would have said that, my grandfather, for instance, saying it, never would have thought that he was being racist in saying it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have multiple things that are all true at the same time.
Yeah.
Now where we have to get to is acknowledging, okay, that's wrong. Okay, I said that. Okay, I did that. People who wore blackface, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
We viewed that as funny. It shouldn't have been funny.
Yeah.
It wasn't funny to the black community, but we as a society viewed that as okay, and now we're saying it's not. So we need to fix it. But I love what you're saying of give people the opportunity to say, you know what, I see that was wrong now.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like good.
Without completely, ruining their future as well.
Yeah. And I feel like blackface is a really good example of the kind of things that we've been talking about, because the people who started blackface knew what they were doing. Mm-hmm. They were doing that so they didn't have to pay black actors. But the people viewing the blackface didn't necessarily make that connection. Mm-hmm. And so you've got this like multi-level problematic thing where some people are doing the thing and they're doing it on purpose because they know that it's wrong. And then some people are doing the thing and they don't know that it's wrong. They don't realize why it's wrong. They don't understand how it started, but it's just, they're used to it now.
Mm-hmm. History and context are very important.
Yeah.
And that's really what you're coming back to with the whole Southern culture aspect is, there is this idea of Southern pride. There's this idea of this is our heritage. And again, that can be true, but being able to acknowledge that there are unpleasant aspects of that heritage, and we don't want to celebrate that. Why are we tearing down these statues? Why do we want to celebrate that?
And a lot of that
is history.
Yeah.
We shouldn't erase history, but we don't have to celebrate certain things.
Well, and a lot of those monuments went up in response to the civil rights movements in the 20th century. They weren't even to commemorate the war. They were to intimidate other people. Mm-hmm. And when you realize that, you start to see, maybe these statues aren't actually teaching history. Maybe they're not as important as we thought they were. Maybe they were from an assembly line somewhere that didn't want black people to vote, and that's the kind of thing that we have to get to the bottom of in order to really dismantle this thing at its core.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Again, I spent a very, very brief amount of time in Germany, but I do remember it being striking to me. You walk into almost any American airport, institution, hotel, whatever it is, and there's something, right? There's a picture of the president, there's a monument, there's a statue, there are nobody's commemorating Hitler in Germany. Right? Like they don't need to be reminded of that. They know. Mm-hmm. And that's almost, I never really thought of it at that time this way, but that's almost kind of the argument that I think can be made now of, we know about the Civil War. We know the reasons behind it. Do we necessarily need statues and monuments and paintings on street corners
Hmm.
to do that? Right?
Yeah.
So as we kind of bring this to a close, you've said a lot of great and thought provoking things. But I want you to kind of summarize it for me, because again, the idea of the program and the interview is what you believe. What do you believe about where we are as a society and where we're going, and the value of history and culture in that?
I think we can look at Southern heritage a like a house. It's got a lot of rooms, and right now, Southern culture is such that those rooms are full of white people and white people's junk. And I feel like if we start to unload some of the junk, we can make room for more people. I feel like if we can cut off some of the sandbags that are holding this hot air balloon down, um, then we can add more people into the basket, and we can get where we're going. Um, we just need to give up our stranglehold on these traditions that don't serve us, these ideas that don't serve us, and realize that y'all is an inclusive word. The South can be an inclusive place. Southern hospitality applies to everybody, and we just need to open up our arms and hug people. And we weren't we were told to love people and not judge them,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what we need to get to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insights and your thoughts. At some point, I'd love to have you back for another interview and talk about the whole wizard thing, because I'm imagining Gandalf and you shall not pass. Sure, that's not what you're talking about. But that would be a whole fascinating discussion. But thank you so much. Two white people have just solved all of the racism problem in America.
All of them, they're gone now. You're welcome.
But hey, you know what? If we don't have the discussions, nothing gets solved.
And
Right?
honestly, it's our work to do. White people started the racism problem in America, and white people have to fix it.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody for watching. I hope that there has been some insight, some tidbit, something that has been said here that maybe it irked you a little bit. Maybe it stirred you up. Maybe it just got you and you don't quite know why. That's okay. Look inside and examine, why is that bothering you? What is it about it? Because that's how we change. That's how we grow. That's how we get past some of this garbage, is we ask the questions. We don't shout. We don't use the rhetoric. We don't throw out there every platitude and one-liner we can think of. We listen, we ask questions, and we examine ourselves and say, okay, where can I make adjustments? Does this mesh? Does it not mesh? How can I grow? That's how change happens, I believe. And I hope that happens for you on some level. Thanks so much for joining us. Elijah, again, thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Have a great one.